Okay, everyone, welcome to today's show. Joining me today is Mike Williams, the host of Sage of Quay Radio Hour and a true pioneer in the world of alternative research and critical thinking. Mike is known for his deep dives into esoteric topics, social engineering, and the hidden forces shaping our reality, from exploring the Paul is dead theory to exposing the Tavistock Institute's influence on music and culture. His work challenges mainstream narratives and invites us to question what we think we know. Mike, welcome to the show, my friend.
John, thank you for asking me to join your show.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to this, mate. I have been for weeks now. I mean, the Beatles is such an interesting topic. Even just posted up in my community page, just saying I was going to have you on, and it just created this, opened a Pandora's box of comments. Arguments were going off about, oh no, it's just a bit of artistic impression. It's not really anything occult, and it's all this, and then there were backwards and forwards, and that was just in the comments. So it's a huge subject, isn't it, Mike? And like, how did you even get interested in it in the first place?
Well, I was a huge Beatle freak, John, going back to when I was a kid, and I've told this story a number of times. I remember very clearly in 1968, when I was 9 years old, bugging my parents to take me to go see Yellow Submarine. So even at 9 years old, and my brother's about 14 months younger than I am, and the two of us were really into the Beatles. So I was this little Beatle freak. And going into, the 1970s, I knew about and heard about the rumor of Paul McCartney being replaced, or otherwise known as Paul is dead. And I just thought it was a clever marketing ploy because the Beatles have always been sold to us as four guys that are very clever and witty. And it was a way to engage with their fans. And in fact, the whole rumor did tick up record sales when it came out. And so I was one of these people that heard the rumor, and I always thought that Paul has always been Paul, and it's just like I said, a marketing ploy that the Beatles put out there to engage with their fan base. And so it wasn't until 2016 that I came across a book titled The Memoirs of Billy Shears. And the book actually was published in September of 2009. And so 7 years later, I caught up with it and I found it on Amazon and I read through it. It was a recommended item from Amazon and I took a look at it and I read the synopsis and I thought, okay, I'll give this a shot and see what this is about. So I read the book, and when I read it, there was a lot of information in that book, and I mean a lot of information that contradicted the official narrative. And it was a bit mind-blowing. So at that point, I could have done two things. One, I could have just set the book aside and continued to believe what I believed about the Beatles, or I can take a look at the claims that the book was making about Paul McCartney and the Beatles and see if I can either debunk what was being said in the book or confirm what we were being told. And so I embarked on that process. Probably what I'll be uh, most known for is the work where I took a dive into their music and whether they wrote all their music and whether they played on all of their recorded tracks. And I put that presentation out back in April of 2020. It's titled, Did the Beatles Write All Their Own Music? And it's 4.5 hours long. And I had two follow-ups uh, to that presentation, one I think in 2023 and another one in the early part of 2024. And I concluded that they did not write all their own music and that they did not play on all of their recorded tracks. And in fact, that the Beatles were a creation of the Tavistock Institute with linkages going back to the Frankfurt School. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Frankfurt School, initially out of Germany, and their ideology was, and still is to this day, cultural Marxism, the implementation of Marxism. And so the Beatles were put into play as a gigantic social engineering initiative. And they were really the first created band with the mission to social engineer at a worldwide level. And their job was to set the agenda forward for the New World Order, the One World Order, whatever you want to call them, the control system, to break down traditional family values, to break down traditional religions. In particular, they had a target on Christianity, and what ensued after the Beatles, because the Beatles, John, became a template
Yep.
for all the bands that followed. So Tavistock created the Beatles, Tavistock created the Rolling Stones. The entire British invasion, that's what they called it, came out of the Tavistock Institute. And for those who are not familiar with Tavistock, they're out of London, and they've been in existence now for 100 years. They initially began as the propaganda arm for the British military going back to World War I, known as Wellington House. And then, and I think it was 1921, and that was about the same time that the Frankfurt School came together out of Germany. They became the Tavistock Clinic, and they said that their mission was to take a look at and to evaluate and see if they could help soldiers from World War I who were suffering from what they referred to back in the day as shell shock. Okay, and so really what it was, what they were doing was they were uh, working with these subjects to better understand human psychology and trauma. But they weren't necessarily doing it to help them. They were doing it so that they can further understand how to engage mass mind control, manipulation through psychological means, social engineering. So the Beatles, though, became the largest, by far, the most significant uh, social engineering initiative that was based in music. There are images on the internet of Paul McCartney and George Harrison with bird cages on their heads. There's also images of John Lennon in a Superman shirt leaning up against a bird cage. Birdcage symbolism is Illuminati symbolism for mind control. So the first question we've got to ask ourselves is, why are the Beatles engaged in this type of symbolism? So what the controllers do is they communicate out to their inner circle through this symbolism. They refer to you and me and everybody else, people who are listening to this, as the profane. We are not educated in the esoteric, in the occult, in their symbolism and all that stuff. So they communicate out. And so when I saw that symbolism, and I actually talked about it a little bit in my first presentation, more so afterwards, because I didn't want to bog the first presentation down with MK Ultra or Illuminati mind control. When I saw that symbolism, that said to me that it's possible they were in mind control programs, handled and groomed from an early age. How early? I don't know. Could it be preteen? Maybe teens? Could be. But I think by the time they got to Hamburg, when they were in their late teens, I think John was around 20, uh, they were in a program. Okay, so I put this chart together to explain the Beatles' 1960 through 1963 timeline. So let me just take you through it. I have the chart numbered, and I'll step through it as quickly as I can, but slow enough so that it makes sense. So I just talked about the documentary from the 1980s, the Complete Beatles, which was considered the documentary on the Beatles until Anthology was released in the 1990s. And in that documentary, it tells us that John Lennon and Paul McCartney, whether individually or together, allegedly wrote 100 songs between them from 1956 through 1962. 100 songs between 1956 and 1962. So just keep that in mind because that's going to come into play in a little bit. In 1960, as I mentioned, in August of 1960, bullet 3 here, I'll get to 2 in a moment. That's when the Beatles first arrive in Hamburg. And when they arrive, John Lennon is 20 years old, Paul is 18, George is 17, and again, Pete Best is their drummer. They were young, they were inexperienced, and they were rough around the edges. They were a bar and club band, and not a very good one at that. So, what was Hamburg? So let's just pause for a second. Hamburg was boot camp. Remember, you asked the question, um, why these four guys? And I said, well, because they needed their performers. They needed a veneer for the psychological operation known as the Beatles. And so Hamburg was boot camp. Hamburg was playing 7 hours a night for 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time to build their playing chops so that they would get to a point where they were adequate or competent enough on their instruments where when Tavistock was ready to throw the switch on Beatlemania, they would send him out to go do their live gigs, and they would be able to perform the songs that they were taught. So the songs that the Beatles were playing live between 62 and through 1966, they were taught these songs. They didn't write these songs, they were taught these songs. In fact, I did an analysis. It was a real quick down and dirty. I took a look at the number of songs that the Beatles had recorded, had under their belt at a certain point in time, like 63, 64, 65, 66, and how many of the original songs up to that point did they actually perform live? And it was around 25%. So about 25, 30% of the songs that they were credited with writing on their albums and their singles were played live. So we have to ask ourselves, what happened to the other 70, 75% of the songs? And what we find during their concerts is there's a repetition where they uh, tended to play the same songs over and over. In fact, in a 1966 concert, they were going back to songs from their albums from 1963, Please Please Me and with the Beatles. In 1966, after they released Revolver, on August 5th of 1966, they went on tour. John, they didn't play one track from Revolver during their live shows in the US. Not one track. So we have to ask ourselves, how could a band, or why would a band who just released a brand new album, and really it's a turnkey album. Revolver was really the setup to Sgt. Pepper in the psychedelic era. Why did they not play one song off of Revolver? The answer to that, well, my answer to that is because they weren't taught the songs to play. Period. Because if you have a new album out, you're going to play at least a couple of tracks off that album
Yeah.
in order to promote the album. And they did not do that. Okay. So, but we'll cover that in more
Mm.
detail, maybe in greater detail when we get to the album before that, Rubber Soul. So anyway, so they're in Hamburg starting in August of 1960. And then in 1961, um, bullet number 4, they're doing all of these live performances within the UK and Hamburg. So from Germany, August of 1960, they did Germany from August of 1960 through December of 1962. So they fell on their face in 1960 in Germany, and then all of a sudden, if you go on to Wikipedia and take a look, type in, do a search on the Beatles live shows, and take a look at the number of live shows they were doing. It was virtually every single day. Who's booking these shows? Why are these shows being booked? How is a band that is not very good, a rough around the edges bar and club band, how are they getting all of these bookings? So this is something we have to start thinking through. So August of 1960, they're in Hamburg, and then something very interesting happens January 1st of 1962, basically 16 months, 1 year and 4 months after their debut in Hamburg, they land an audition with Decca Records on January 1st of 1962. Okay, uh, how? How did that happen? What did they have? What did they achieve? What did they have under their belt that would get them in the door to do a audition with Decca Records? So they go to Decca and we're told that they did 15 songs within several hours, and three of those songs were original compositions. Like Dreamers Do, Hello Little Girl, and Love of the Loved. We're told that those were Lennon and McCartney originals. And Like Dreamers Do and Hello Little Girl wind up on Anthology 1. And let me see. And I forgot which one. One of them is Love of the Loved, I think, is officially unreleased. Okay, so two of the three songs wind up on Anthology, and one of them, at least to the best of my knowledge today, is still unreleased. Decca declines. Decca says, no, no, not going to sign you. Okay, so somehow they wind up going to Decca on January 1st, 1962. They do 15 songs, three originals, and Decca turns them down. Then what happens is in February of 1962, Brian Epstein takes tapes to George Martin of EMI. Now, the other thing we have to remember about George Martin is George Martin was not just a producer. George Martin was the head of the Parlophone label, which came in under EMI. So George wasn't just a producer. George was the head of the Parlophone label. So Brian Epstein pitches the demos to George Martin, and George Martin says, not interested. Based upon what I'm hearing here, I'm not going to sign them. Okay, so now they've been turned down twice. And I'll get into some of what George Martin said in a bit because it's very important. Then something interesting happens, John. Turned down by Decca, turned down by EMI, and now the Beatles land a gig with the BBC in March of 1962. So a month after George Martin says, yeah, not interested, somehow they wind up on the BBC. Now, the BBC is obviously a mainstream media outlet. And we have to ask ourselves, what strings were being pulled to make that happen? They failed in Hamburg. Decca turns them down. EMI turns them down. And the BBC says, yeah, come on in. So their BBC shows ran from March of 62 through May of 1965. And many of you may have the Beatles live at the BBC sessions. Just so you know, they were not live. They were pre-recorded. They did takes and overdubs. Okay, and I actually did a presentation on that, and I'm convinced that those BBC sessions, especially between 1963 and 1965, the instrumentals were performed by studio musicians with the Beatles singing the vocals, just like they did on Rubber Soul. So then what happens is in June of 1962, there's a change of heart. George Martin decides that he is going to sign the Beatles, and he signs into a contract in June of 1962. Now, in Joseph Niesgoda's book, he says that that contract was actually signed in May of 1962, but the prevailing date that I have found is June. So let's just say May, June, but June being the date you're going to see most often if you do the research. And so he signs them. So the question becomes, why the about face? Why did he turn around and say, yeah, I'll sign him after he said that he wasn't interested? So I can only speculate on this. There's a couple of stories out there. I won't get into great detail because it'll take up too much time. But I think what happened was, if I had to guess, and it is a guess, the way the Masonic structure works, it's like a big corporate pyramid. That's exactly what it is. And not everybody is aware or brought into the loop at the same time. So I think it's possible at the time when Brian Epstein brought these tapes to George Martin was not yet brought into the loop with regard to what the Beatles were going to be used for, what their role was going to be. So he turned them down. And he should have turned them down because they were not a very good band and they didn't have any songwriting prowess. So he did what any normal producer or record label owner or uh, head of a record label would do when they heard a band that wasn't very good. They would say, no, thank you. So in memoirs, it tells us that he received a phone call from upstairs from one of his bosses. Now, who would that be? Well, his immediate boss at the time was a guy by the name of Len Wood, but the head of EMI was Sir Joseph Lockwood. So I think what happened was it was either Len Wood or Joseph Lockwood himself who made the phone call and said, no, George, we're going to take him on, so bring him in. Then George is brought into the loop as to why, because I'm sure George asked the question, why why do we want these guys? They didn't show me anything. And then there had to be a conversation that said, look, there's stuff going on, take them on, and then we're going to bring you in. We'll explain the whole thing. Now, here's the thing. When George first takes them on, he doesn't work with them directly. He assigns it to Ron Richards. Ron Richards was another producer with Parlophone, EMI. Ron later went on to produce the Hollies. Now, Ron was no slouch. So he starts to work with the Beatles in the studio, getting them to record, and it doesn't work out. In fact, I have a chart where I take my audience through an interview that their sound engineer who worked with George Martin at the time, Norman Smith, said that in a New Musical Express music publication back in 1971, he said that they failed in the studio, that they didn't have the chops. And if I have a chance, I'll show you that article. So what happens is Ron's working with them. He's trying to get something out of them. He's not getting anything out of them. And the way the story goes, as it's explained in the book, is George Martin and Brian Epstein are listening to the playback now. And, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. Now, we have to understand that George Martin worked with professional studio musicians, period. Period. That's how the music industry works. They don't have the time or the desire to bring people in and sit down like they're sitting around a campfire with their arms around everybody and telling them, don't worry, I'll nurture you, I'll teach you, I'll do this, I'll do that. It's a business. So they didn't have time for this. They didn't have time for non-performers. In fact, Quincy is passed now, but going back maybe 3 or 4 years ago, in an interview, he called the Beatles, in particular Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney, no playing MFers. This is Quincy Jones, another producer. And if I have time, I could take people through that as well, what took place during that particular session. So now what happens is George gets another phone call. And the phone call he gets, again, Memoirs is telling us this narrative. He's told, no more delegating. You can't delegate this. You can't give it to Ron. You got to take it on, George. It's you. They're yours. They're yours. And so that's when the relationship between the Beatles and George Martin really came together. And when George Martin first got them, he said what he needed to do was to go out and find songs that they could sing. And let me see if I could find something here. Here's an article. Can you see that, John?
Yep, can see that.
Here's an article from the Mersey Beat. It was a music publication back in the day. It's the August-September of 1962 issue. And the headline of the article says that the Beatles changed drummers. So this was about Pete Best out, Ringo in. So Pete Best was the Beatles' original drummer, and then Ringo joins them. And again, this is August 23rd through September, I think this is 6th of 1962. Now, along with announcing that Pete's out, Ringo's in, the article goes on to say that the Beatles will fly to London to make recordings at EMI Studios. They will be recording numbers that have been specifically written for the group, which they have received from their recording manager, George Martin. The article does not say that they're going to record songs written by them. It says they're going to record numbers that have been specifically written for the group. And this coalesces with what George Martin had said in various interviews, that when he first got them, that he needed to go find songs for them. Now, let me just take you through some things that George said in his own words. These are interviews. I have the interviews. These are quotes from those interviews. I already mentioned that when Brian Epstein brought the tapes to him in February of 1962, George said, if you want me to judge them based on what you're playing me, I'm sorry, I need to turn you down. And then on meeting the Beatles in 1962, in another interview, he said, I wasn't terribly impressed with the first stuff they did. In the documentary produced by George Martin, George is talking to Howard Goodall. Howard is another composer and a broadcaster. He's very accomplished. And George says to him, they had this wonderful charisma. They made you feel good. I thought their music was rubbish. And he goes on to say that even though they had really nothing behind them, they were still fairly irreverent. And then he says, so I looked at these four guys and thought none of them shines above all the others. Now think about that, John. Paul McCartney and John Lennon are supposed to be these prolific genius songwriters.
Yeah.
He gets them and he says, I look at these four guys and none of them shines above all the others. So Paul is not shining above Ringo, George above George. I've got these four guys. Now, what am I going to do with them? And he said that Love Me Do was the best song he could find from them. He was very conscious it was not the big hit he was looking for. And then in another interview, he goes on to say that they certainly had no, and during this interview, when George says this, he pauses because he's measuring his words now. He says they certainly had no, and then he says it wasn't too obvious they could be songwriters at this stage. Love Me Do was the best thing that they had. And that's if they even wrote Love Me Do. Now, if we go back to this chart, this is an interesting set of quotes from George Martin, because if we go back to bullet number 1 here, from the Complete Beatles, the documentary, it said that Lennon and McCartney allegedly wrote 100 songs between them from 1956 to 1962.
Where are they?
Where are they?
Yeah.
Where are they? And as I mentioned, the 3 songs, original compositions that they allegedly wrote and recorded at the Decca audition, none of those songs were on any of the recordings, at the records or the singles or albums that the Beatles released while the band was together between 1962 through 1970. So if we stay on this chart for a second, so now we have these quotes from George Martin. We know now that the Beatles don't have songs. The Beatles are not these great musicians, skilled musicians, but on March 22nd, 1963, that's 322, folks, for those of you who are into the occult, Skull and Bones, Genesis 3:22. 9 months after the EMI contract is signed, they released their first album. And the first album has 8 original songs on it. So they went from having no songs, from George Martin saying, I have to go find them songs, to going back to the Mercy Beat article saying that they were going to record songs written for them, to releasing an album with 14 songs, of which 8 were told were original compositions. And then 9 months, or actually 8 months after Please Please Me is released, that's their debut album. And by the way, their UK albums are their official releases. It is not the US Capitol albums. The UK albums are their official releases. On November 22nd, 1963, the same day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in the United States, they released their second album, 14 songs, 8 originals. So they show up in June of 1962. They don't have any songs. They don't have anything.
They've got Love Me Do, right? I mean, so they did have that one.
Well, we're told that they have Love Me Do.
Did
Right
they
now, I
write
don't
that
know
one?
whether they,
Did they write
I
that?
don't,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was going to say that.
yeah. Well, let's just say they had that one. I
All right. Yeah.
personally, I'm not convinced they actually even wrote that, to be honest with you. Um, but in any case, so from middle of June of 1962, well, 9 months later, they released their first album, 8 original songs, and then 8 months later after that, they have another 8 original songs. And now they have 16 original compositions when before they had essentially zero, or if we want to say one, if we want to say that they did actually wrote Love Me Do. Now, to put it into perspective, folks, let's take a look at elapsed time. So from Hamburg, August of 1960 to the Decca audition, that took 1 year and 4 months. Now, remember, when they showed up in Hamburg, they had absolutely nothing. Marginal musicians, no songwriting prowess, yet 16 months after they show up in Hamburg, Germany, they're sitting in Decca, in the studios at Decca, cutting a demo. From Hamburg, August 1960 to their EMI contract, 1 year and 10 months. Quite a feat. From Hamburg to their first album, Please Please Me, 2 years and 7 months. From Hamburg to With the Beatles, their second album, 3 years and 3 months. And if I just jump to the bottom here, from Hamburg, August of 1960 to the United States in February of 1964, February 7th of 1964, 3 years and 5 months. How'd they do that? Rockets on their shoes. So they went from zero to hero in 3.5 months. And when the Beatles arrived in America, the tagline was, the Beatles conquer America. Conquer America. And for those of you who don't think that words mean anything, words mean things. Right? Those phrases, those slogans are put out there for a reason. In fact, that's one of the Frankfurt School's big things was slogans. Put slogans out. People catch on to slogans. They like to repeat them. They like to parrot them. So the Beatles conquer America. So the only way that any of this can really happen, I concluded, and I know there are going to be people who are going to disagree, but I'm going to tell you that this is what happened. There was the machine behind the band. These guys were groomed, handled, and they were pulled along. Because when you look at this chart, at least when I look at this chart, that's a lot of stuff that had to go down in a short period of time for these guys to end up in America on February 7th of 1964, all the way here on the right-hand side. Now, the book also tells us that John Lennon and Paul McCartney entered into a Faustian bargain, a deal with the devil, on October 24th of 1963. So it took place after their first album was released and to a lot of fanfare and a lot of success. And so the way these Faustian bargains work is you get a taste of success, they whet your appetite, and then they say, you want some more? Do you like it? You like the success? You like the money? You like the fame? You like the notoriety? You like the popularity? Oh, yeah, I love all of that stuff. You want more of it? Oh, yeah, I want more of that. Okay, we can make that happen. So the book tells us that a Faustian bargain was done on October 24th of 1963. Now, did it? I don't know. I wasn't there. But I will tell you that these Faustian bargains and these deals do happen. They do take place. We can point to the whole 27 Club
Yeah.
as one small example of people that died young um,
Yeah.
in the rock music business. And of course, it's not just the 27 Club.
Michael,
Uh,
just quickly going to mention on that. I've interviewed guests with this, and someone was saying who's actually in the satanic ritual world. They said that what happens is it's every 13 years that there's a ritual that they have to take part in. So you have one at 13, one at 26, and so that's why a lot of them die at 27 because they just say, "I don't want to do it anymore," and so that's they're taken out.
yeah, and 13 is a very important number in the occult,
Yeah.
a very important number.
Mm.
Um, so this John is in a nutshell how I concluded that this was all constructed. This was all manufactured. In fact, there's a quote from Davy Jones of the Monkees. He did an interview going back, a long time ago. And in that interview, he said that the Monkees were not the first manufactured band. He said it was the Beatles.
Yeah.
And Davy goes on to explain, with the boots and the haircuts and all that stuff, they were the first manufactured band. We got into some heavy stuff there, folks. And
Yeah.
I know it was heavy, and I know a lot of it is kind of like, I got
Mm.
to sit with this, but
Hmm.
just pause and take a listen.
Hmm.
All right. So early on, back in 2016, I put some charts together to take a look at this whole Paul is dead bit. And again, remember when I first got into this, I thought Paul was always Paul, and the whole Paul is dead thing was just a clever, witty marketing program that the
Mm.
Beatles rolled out there. But here, picture number one, top left is biological Paul McCartney. And then take a look at the pictures to the right and then on the bottom row. Number two is not Paul, that's a double. Three is Billy Shears with a wig.
Mm.
He's got latex. Four is Billy as well. Five might be Billy. I don't know. Sometimes it's tough. Here's the thing. I was told by a source that right out of the chute, when the Beatles were created, there were three doubles and lookalikes for each Beatle. That's why it's difficult sometimes when you look at these images to decipher them, because some of these doubles and lookalikes were very, very good, and it's tough
Yeah.
to distinguish and differentiate between the real guy and the double or the lookalike. Six, another iteration of Paul McCartney, another double. Seven, eight is Billy. So if you take a look at picture number one, just take a step back. I'm talking to the audience here, and look at those pictures and think to yourself, does two, three, four, five, six, seven, and eight look like the guy in number one? Exactly like the guy in number one. Some people might say, well, he resembles him. Yeah, he's supposed to resemble him, but it's not him. Not him. Let's go to page number two. So here's the same image in uh, top left, number one. And here are other images
Mm.
of Paul McCartney. Number two is supposed to be Paul McCartney in Hamburg. Now, what we need to understand is what the control system has been doing, Tavistock has been doing, and the machine behind the whole Beatle psyop, they have been doctoring images since day one. So here what we have is we have a hybrid image blending Paul McCartney with Billy. So Take a look at picture number 4. That's Billy.
Yeah.
Number 2 is a combination of 4 and let's say number 1, even though this would be when Paul was younger back in the Hamburg days. So number 2 is a hybrid. This image has been doctored. Number 3, I don't know who that is, to be honest with you. 4 is Billy. 5 is Billy. 6 is another look-alike or a double. 7 is Billy. 8 is Billy.
Why is six not could not be a young Billy?
Take a look at Billy's nose. So Billy's nose here, let's go
Mm,
to image number 4. His nose is he has this narrow, kind of like it's beaked.
mm,
See?
yeah.
We see it here, and it's hard to hear because it's straight on here.
Mm,
Now, what happened was over time, he had surgery, plastic surgery done on his nose. And we could see where the nostrils here, the nostrils are more flared here. They got pulled in to look like Paul's. This is clearly not Paul McCartney. So number 5, that's not Paul McCartney.
yeah.
6, 6 is a tough one. But the interesting thing with 6 is um, he looks somewhat like Paul,
Mm,
but it's not him. First of all, his hair is parted kind of like to the left middle. Paul's hair was always parted to the on the left-hand side, not where it's at right there.
yeah, but hair is something that can is
But the
not.
point,
Yeah.
so the point being is
Mm,
that we've got these different faces of Paul McCartney, and what they did, John,
mm,
was to create a composite Paul McCartney. So
yeah.
when we look at Paul McCartney, people say, well, back in 1964, when this was taken, I think it was 64, 65, that's Paul McCartney. Okay, that's Paul McCartney. Then we get to Sergeant Pepper. We get to picture number 3, the Sergeant Pepper era. We're told that's Paul McCartney. Then we get to the Wings days. Picture number 8, we're told that's Paul McCartney. So the masses are presented with this not as a comparison of images, but it's a single image, and you're told that's Paul McCartney, and you're thinking, well, the people are going to be thinking, okay, well, it's got to be Paul McCartney. Who else would it be? It's not until you lay out the collage that you start to see all the differences. That's why I created this slide here. Not the same guy. Billy has an elongated face.
Mm.
Okay. He has a different nose. And he just looks, I mean, just the way he just looks different.
Not only that, Mike, but character-wise, temperament-wise, the original seemed very unassuming, sweet, kind of innocent, sort of gentle, delicate, and then the new one comes on. He seems a bit of an arsehole, to be honest, you know. But
Yeah. Yeah. Bill, much different personalities. Here's
yeah,
the thing. Billy is taller than Paul by about
yep,
2 inches or so.
yeah. That's why he's always barefoot.
Um,
That's why they started doing him barefoot in some of the album covers and stuff like that, right?
well, they had to, well, or they
So,
would position him the way he would stand.
yeah,
He might
right.
lean back a little bit.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
might lean a little
yeah,
bit.
yeah,
You'll see images. That was to basically reduce the size so that
yeah,
he would be of equal height with, let's say, John Lennon and George Harrison, because we were
yeah.
always told that Paul was about the same height as
Mm,
John and George. So you will see these,
mm.
whenever you look at the images of them together and it's Billy, you will see that the way he is standing, he's either leaning back, he's leaning to the side, he's trying to reduce his size.
Yep, yep.
He's trying to mitigate his height difference. He has a more elongated face. He has different ears. He has a different nose,
Mm.
especially in the beginning. And I'll show you images of that. Most importantly, Billy has a prosthetic right eye. He's blind in his right eye. And of
All
course,
right.
Paul had two good eyes.
Mm.
Billy's blind in his right eye. This was a discovery made by my colleague, Sally Whitty. Sally's a great researcher, and she is blind in her left eye.
Hmm.
And she was looking at images and videos of Billy, and she noticed that his eyes weren't always syncing up, like hers didn't always sync up. And as she looked more and more into it, she called it out, and correctly, in my view. And Billy actually confirmed this to us in an interview that he did with an exhibit going back about a year ago. It was the Eyes of the Storm exhibit. And he's going through the exhibit area, and he's with a an interviewer. I think it was CBS or ABC here in the States. And they stop at this one picture and they're talking about it. And these images were supposedly images that Paul took back in 1964, allegedly. And so as they're talking about it, the person who's interviewing Billy, Paul McCartney, says, "Well, you really have to have an eye to take a picture like that." And Billy looks at the image, he steps forward, and he goes, "Yes, my left one." So he's saying, "I only have sight in my left eye." And Sally's discovery, like my work on the music, actually made its way into the memoirs of Billy Shears. So the book was updated to bring in her discovery of Billy being blind in his right eye, and also my research on the music.
Wow. Good
We
work.
have the same thing with John Lennon, by the way.
Yeah.
There you go. Same thing.
So they had
You know,
they had lots of
it's
so you mentioned they had doubles, right? And I'm guessing did
yeah.
that must have been because they had such a hectic schedule with performing every single night pretty much, right? That they just had to because it would just been too draining. That's how they sold it to them anyway, was it maybe?
It was the performance, it was the interviews, it was a lot of stuff. It was see the Beatles, their schedule was unbelievably hectic. You
Yeah.
go back to 1963, the height of Beatlemania, 1964 going into 65, it was hectic. And so they would have these doubles and lookalikes. Sometimes the doubles and lookalikes were there in order to be able to push the screaming audience, the girls, in one direction as the Beatles were able to exit uh, through another door. It's like if they were at a venue.
Mm.
So Tavistock had to make sure that they had their band one way or another. It's Think of it this way. It's like you ever see these Beatle tribute bands like
Mm.
Rain and
Yeah.
the Fab Four, bands like that. Very good performers, very good band. I've gone to a number of these shows. I enjoy them,
Mm.
but when you're looking at the people playing the role of Paul McCartney or John Lennon or George Harrison or Ringo Starr on stage, the way the makeup is done and all that, um, some of these performers, they look very good as far as looking like the actual person. I remember seeing Rain going back several years ago, and the guy that was playing Paul McCartney, I was shocked at how much that guy looked like Paul McCartney, well, Billy from the Sergeant Pepper era, and from the Fab Four, the guy that plays George Harrison. I mean, when he's up in his makeup and his costumes, he's a dead ringer.
Right.
Really, you know. So anyway, they had to have all these doubles and lookalikes.
Where do they get them from though? Like, they can't just put out an ad in the local newspaper, can they? Like, how are they sourcing
I,
them?
I'm, yeah, I'm going to assume, John, that these are people that are in the pipeline,
Right.
in the deep state pipeline. These are people that are in programs or
Mm.
whatever. Look, I have a guy that contacted me several years back, and he said to me that he was stopped on two different occasions here in the United States in two different cities. A person came up to them, and not the same person, and said, "You would make a very good double of Paul McCartney." It's Billy, but think he's Paul
Mm-mm.
McCartney.
Yeah. Yeah.
It happened once, and then he's in a different city, and he was approached again, and the same it was almost the identical conversation, same dialogue. But the second time, I think, if I recall the conversation correctly, the person who relayed this information to me. In fact, I had lunch with him going back several years ago. I actually met him. he said the guy said, say something. And he's Southern, so he had like a Southern accent.
Yeah.
And he said, well, we'd have to work on the accent. We would have to work on the accent.
Mm.
And he sent me a picture of himself. This is before I went to lunch with him. And I got to tell you, John, he had a very strong resemblance to an older Paul McCartney, to an older Billy. And I can see if you were scouting this type of thing, where you would look at him and say, we can work with him.
Yeah.
We can do something to make him enough, cosmetics, whatever, even surgically, to make him look like Paul McCartney. I never showed the picture because of privacy,
Yeah, no, I get that. But I
confidentiality,
mean,
but
how
it
can you
was it
how
was
can you
pretty
make
good.
how can you make sure that they're great musicians though as well, or are they miming that then? You know, if you take someone off the street because they're dead ringer and they put them in as a double, are they actually not playing their instruments or they're pretending to play on stage?
That's a good question. Okay, so here's the thing. Most of the time in the live stuff in the early days, it was them. It was the original guys.
Hmm.
Now, that's not to say they didn't have a
Yeah.
double. There's a theory out there that during the August 1966 concerts here in Seattle and so on, um, that there was a double for Paul on stage. And if that's the case, and he was indeed playing, I'll get to that in a moment, then they would have had to have found somebody that is a musician that can play the bass and play along. And that's one scenario, okay? But here's the other thing. Many times when the Beatles were performing live, they were playing to backing tracks, or they had backstage, offstage musicians actually doing the playing, and the Beatles were on stage miming. This sounds like heresy to a lot of people, but we have proof of this.
Yeah.
The proof is Budokan in 1966 and the song Day Tripper. So it's the first couple of bars of Day Tripper. We have the iconic riff. Bow, ba, 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 ba.
Hmm.
Guess what? John and George are not playing the riff. They're clearly not playing it, but it's being played. How
Yeah.
is that happening?
Yeah.
There are either musicians backstage or offstage who are playing, or they're playing to a backing track. I have a guy that I know, very accomplished studio musician, who wrote me when I first uh, showed that clip, and he said to me, Mike, you're absolutely right. He says, I used to do that work. Because I didn't do it for the Beatles. He says, but I used to do that work. I would be backstage or off stage with my guitar, and I would be playing the guitar work. I would be doing the guitar playing. I would be doing, all the heavy lifting, and they would mime on stage, the band. So
Right.
this is what goes on behind the scenes. I just recently received uh, an audio that a person sent me. Did a wonderful job. He took two different concerts that the Beatles did. One was Dodger Stadium, and I think the other one was Candlestick Park in August of 1966, after they released Revolver. And the song was She's a Woman. And what he did was he queued up the song from beginning to end, John, for both concerts. And guess what? They both map identically, which means they were playing to a backing track. Because the possibility that in two different times that you play the song, that everything lines up and matches up, the drums, the guitars, everything matches up identically from performance to performance, is practically nil. Especially when we're talking about the tempo of a song. Because when you play live, there's a tendency to the tempo is going to shift a little bit, 120 beats per minute, 121, 122,
Yeah.
119,
Yeah.
because it's live. It's humans playing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in this example that he sent to me, and thinking about putting it up on my YouTube channel
Mm.
when I have time. So that says, what does that say, folks? That says that they were playing to a backing track. So either playing to backing tracks, they were had offstage musicians like they did in Budokan, or that was a backing track as well. Now the question becomes, did the Beatles ever play any of their shows as Beatles, when they were playing live? Yeah, they did. But what I have found is typically the bigger the venue, uh, the more we run into backing tracks and studio players doing the actual instrumentals. They would sing the vocals live, but the instrumentation wasn't always them. I'm not going to say it was never them. It wasn't always them. So you had a combination of them playing live. You had musicians playing backstage. They were miming. Backing tracks. They were miming. They played to a backing track on the Ed Sullivan Show. People don't want to believe this. I have a clip of the Dave Clark Five on the Ed Sullivan Show, and guess what happened? The backing track failed. And I actually have the footage of this, and the Dave Clark Five is standing there, and there's no music. No music. It went dead. We have to understand that there is so much invested in this, so much money invested in this, whether it's the Beatles or not. We're talking about these big name bands, performers, entertainers. You're going on the Ed Sullivan Show in front of millions and millions of people. They're not going to take a chance that the song's going to get flubbed, that a lyric is going to be forgotten, that there's going to be a screw up on the guitar,
Yep.
Ringo's going to miss something on the drums. It's just not going to happen. Especially when you're talking about when the Beatles were first introduced into the United States, they're going to make sure that that is buffed up and polished up and that there is virtually no room for error. So now the other thing too, when people watch these clips on YouTube and they listen to it and they go, wow, that sounds really good. Listen to how good they're playing, how good it sounds. Here's the other thing. Many of those clips that you're watching on YouTube, especially like the performances at Shea Stadium and other big venues, those clips were enhanced post-production to make sure that the audio was spruced up and everything was synced up so that you get the best listening experience. They could put the best product forward. There was a Beatles official publication in October of 1965. I forgot the name of the publication, but in it, it explained that uh, Brian Epstein was wanted to release the footage of the concert at Shea Stadium, but they had to do overdubs, especially with the vocals, because of all the screaming that took place at the venue at Shea Stadium. So when you have all this screaming going on, that's all going to bleed into the microphones, whether it be the vocal mics or whether it be the amplifiers or how the drums are mic'd. You're going to get that. It's just the way it works. It's a microphone, and you're going to get bleed. But that article said that they were going to overdub the vocals on that Shea Stadium performance. So my take on it is if they admitted if that Beatles official magazine from 1965 admitted to overdubbing the vocals, then they're going to overdub anything else that doesn't sound right. Because again, it's a product. Understand this. And I'm talking to you, John, I'm talking to the audience. And the reason why I get like this sometimes is because people, it's like shields up. They don't want to hear this because the Beatles are the soundtrack of their life. And here's Mike just raining on everybody's parade. But the music business is a business. I have a friend of mine who's a sound engineer, has worked with big bands out in Europe. And he was telling me, Mike, all of these live performances that you're hearing that with these bands that come out, especially, the bigger bands that sign to labels and all that stuff. He says the amount of work that goes into these recordings, to release these live recordings, he says so much of it is redone in the studio. The audience is enhanced. Guitar tracks will be re-recorded. Drums will be re-recorded. That's what Bernard Purdie was doing. It's called fixing. He was fixing the drum tracks on the Beatle recordings,
Yeah. Yeah.
to give
Yeah.
him. Right? Anyway, so
But
I
I
hope
would,
I answered your
you
question.
did. But Billy Shears, let's say, let's just go with him for an example. He actually was a very talented musician, was he not? And then he was actually performing on stage and playing the instruments, and
Yeah,
they
yeah. So
they must have struck gold when they got him in, no?
Billy's with them. I think Billy was with them for a long time. I think Billy goes back
Mm,
to at least 1962. In the book, he tells us he was a session musician.
mm,
He was he's a very accomplished he's very accomplished at vocal mimicry. So when people say, "Oh, how did they find somebody that looks just like him?" He doesn't look just like him.
mm,
Sounds like him, doesn't sound just like him. Um, he's very good at vocal mimicry. And that was one of his talents. He tells us in the book that he was hired to do sessions where a particular vocalist or singer couldn't make it for whatever reason, and Billy
mm.
would fill in and he would sing the tracks. But yes, he is by trade a wind instrument player
Yeah,
and a piano player,
yeah,
but he's also obviously a guitar player, and he can play bass. He's
mm,
naturally right-handed. Mike Stock, who I did an interview with, and I consider Mike a friend of mine. Uh, Mike is very accomplished. He's out of the UK. He did some work with Billy. I think he did two or three jobs where he was working with him.
mm,
It was a project. I don't know if he was working directly with him, but
mm,
projects that they were both involved in. That's probably the best way to say it. He told me he walked into a studio. It was just quote Paul McCartney there, but it was Billy. He was playing right-handed. And Mike walked in at the time. Mike thought he was Paul McCartney, didn't know that,
mm,
about the
mm,
Billy Shears character. And so Mike says to him, "Hey," he goes, "Wow," he goes, "you're a pretty good right-handed guitar player for a guy that's lefty."
mm.
And so Billy or Paul says to Mike, he says, "Well, back in the day, they didn't have a lot of left-handed instruments, so we had to try to teach myself how to play right-handed," which is not, it's not a good answer, right? Because if you're a left-handed guitar player, and there weren't a lot of left-handed guitars back in the day, you took a right-handed guitar player, you flipped it, and you just restrung the guitar like Jimi Hendrix did,
Mm.
right? You don't have to teach yourself to play right-handed. The truth of the matter is the reason why he was playing right-handed is because Billy plays right-handed. So when he's in the studio recording, he's not recording left-handed, he's recording right-handed. Maybe these days
He plays
he
left-handed
could
now,
do it
though.
left-handed because he's good
Yeah,
at it.
yeah, because he's just practiced so
Oh,
much. Yeah,
he plays
yeah,
left-handed, right? I mean, he's
yeah,
probably look, he's competent. He's very competent. He's a very
yeah,
talented guy.
yeah.
He's right. So there's no taking that away, but he is naturally right-handed, and Mike
Right.
Stock walked in and saw him playing right-handed.
How is it then that Billy was able to get the teeth looking the same? Because he's got very small teeth, the original Paul McCartney, very kind of like, and he's got very bird-like lips, and his eyes are kind of, like they're kind of doubt. What? How do you say? They droop down. And was there a time
Yeah,
when Billy obviously went off and had that work done? I've heard stories about him getting that done in Africa. I don't know, but is this part of your presentation?
yeah. So what happened was that, again, this is going to be very difficult for a lot of people to get their heads wrapped around. This was a deep state operation, so
Yeah,
you know there was no expense spared to make this happen. The Beatles were very important
yeah,
to kick off the counterculture and to do what it is that they did, which was to get the ball rolling in a big way on
yeah.
changing societal norms and all that stuff. Because anytime you ever read anything on the Beatles, you watch a documentary, what do they always tell us? They were a cultural phenomenon.
Mm.
They changed the culture. Okay, so we have to understand it was very important that they do this. Now, let me see if I can find something here. All right, so can you see that,
Yeah,
John?
yeah.
All right. So the teeth, that was all done by going in and doing dental surgery
Hmm.
to get the teeth positioned so that it resembled Paul McCartney. The book tells us the same thing was done for scars, and I guess if there were some moles or whatever, they were surgically done so that he had what Paul had, at least those things that were noticeable. So here's a chart that I put together because people ask about the eyes a lot. First of all, let me just show you one thing here. The guy on the right is Vivian Stanshall. This is the guy that played in the Bonzo Dog Band with Neil Innes. Neil Innes was with the Ruddles. This is Vivian Stanshall. It's a character. This is Billy on the right-hand side.
That's Billy.
Here's Billy on the left-hand. Yep,
They're
that's what he
both
looks like.
they're
That's what he
both the
looked
same.
like.
Well, so that is the original of Billy on the right.
Yep.
No.
Uh-huh. Yep,
What?
that's him. Yep. It'll make more sense in a bit. So here he is as an older Paul McCartney, right?
Mm. Mm.
Well, the guy on the left, to me, looks like an older version of the guy on the right. But more importantly, take a look at the eyes. So the Stanshall character has a lazy or wandering left eye, or at least it appears that way. So what I was looking at, this is a presentation I did back in 2019. I looked at this 5 years
Mm.
ago, 6 years ago now. And we could see the same eye anomaly right here. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look. The left eye has this wandering, kind of lazy
Mm.
look to it. But what's really going on? Is it really a lazy left eye? No, it goes back to what I said before. His left eye is his good eye. His right eye is his blind eye. So what happens is, what I've noticed is when Billy looks left, especially when he looks hard left, the right eye doesn't always track. Now, another problem or another thing that people bring up because they don't understand it, they said, well, artificial eyes don't move. Wrong, 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 wrong. Most artificial eyes have movement. The only time they wouldn't is if the eye is so damaged, then the eye would be static. But most artificial eyes, I'll show you what it looks like. Looks like this on the right-hand side,
Yeah.
right? And it's placed over the ocular part of the eye. So when the eye moves left or right, well, that ocular prosthetic moves left or right. The muscles move left and right, it moves.
Mm.
So it's a fallacy. It's incorrect when people make a blanket statement and say people who have artificial eyes don't have movement in the artificial eye, in the blind eye. It's not
Mhm.
true.
Okay.
Are there chances or scenarios when there is no movement? Yes, but in many, many cases. So Billy has movement in his eye. Here, take a look. I blocked it off. So we can see he's looking straight ahead on the left here. Second picture in, his left eye is looking more to our right. The Stanshall is looking straight at us, just like the first picture, straight at us with his fake eye, his artificial eye. And then in the fourth picture, he's looking
So
to
so
our right.
so this is
Let's,
so
yeah,
this is the guy that they used and turned into Paul McCartney then, but um
yeah,
so he didn't look anything like Paul McCartney at this stage. They had to do so
nope,
much work on him to make him appear because he does look.
yeah.
I mean, Paul McCartney, the original, has got those droopy eyes, hasn't he? And they must have
Yes,
done
he
a
does.
lot
And
of,
that's,
yeah, must have done a lot of
it's
work
done
on
through a
this guy.
blepharoplasty.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So here, people bring that up. Well, how do you change the shape of the eyes? How does that work? It's called a blepharoplasty or a bleph for short.
Hmm.
And a blepharoplasty is a surgical procedure that removes excess fat, muscle, skin from the upper and lower eyelids to redefine the shape of the eye.
Hmm.
So again, I get feedback. People say, "Oh, you can't change the eyes." Not true. It's not true. So we could take a look here. Here he is in his McCartney character on the left-hand side. Here we have him in his Stanshall character on the right-hand side. Let's take a close look at these pictures. And here on the right is him without his mustache. Very difficult to find images of him in the Stanshall character without a mustache. This is
Hmm.
early on. But look at the eyes. Again, we have the left eye not totally in sync with the right eye. Look at the nose. Look at the crease by the nose. The same here, same here. Look at the mustache. the exact same mustache. Look at the mouth, the way the mouth opens, it's the same mouth. We can see the teeth here. Looks like maybe this one has a cap on it or something, but the
Yeah,
teeth
but
look very similar. The
mm,
ears look
mm,
the same, even though it's harder to see on the Stanchill character. But if you look at the ligament or the cartilage around the outside of the ear right here on the McCartney character, and you look at it over here,
mm,
it's the same. And what
mm.
he has on his head is a wig.
Right.
I've determined that Billy did a couple of things with his hair because people are always asking me this. It's either wigs or he had a hair weave. So hair weaves are great because you can actually run your hands through them and not have to worry about the wig coming off. So that's what we have here. So I said, notice the overall facial structure, the jawline, the mouth, the mustache, and the ear. Talked about the eyes. Let me show you something here. Let me see if I have something here I can show you that will blow your mind. Because sometimes people look at this and like, well, I don't know.
Because
Hopefully I have it.
the teeth are identical to the original Paul McCartney, and they're not kind of perfectly straight. They're kind of um,
They had the teeth. He had the teeth surgically rearranged,
yeah,
moved.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Think about it, folks. You could do it with braces. If you have crooked teeth, what do? They
Mm.
take braces and they fix your teeth. Can they take your teeth and move them around? Yes, they can move them around as well. So that's what was done. And today, by the way, he doesn't have the Paul McCartney teeth anymore. He has a whole different set of teeth. Take a look at this, John. Okay, that's Billy, and that's Paul McCartney's son, James McCartney.
I see.
Do we
Yeah,
not
so
see a family resemblance?
mm,
That's Billy.
mhm,
That's his son, James. That's Paul McCartney's son, James.
mm,
Billy's son. In the book, he admits, he says, my son looks a lot like I looked before the transformation, before all the surgeries and the cosmetics, and he used a lot of latex, by the way, a lot of latex. I have
mm.
videos of evidence of the latex on my channel
Yeah.
where you could see where he's touching himself and the
Mm.
latex is stretching and
Where
all
did
that
he
stuff.
where did he have it done though? Like where did he go off to get it done and the eyes done and everything?
I don't know. I don't know where he had it done. I mean, I know about the Kenya film, and there's a lot of speculation that
Yeah.
he was out in Kenya having work done. That could very well be, by the way. I'm not saying that's not true. I don't know.
Mm.
Um, but we have to understand that uh, it was a process that took multiple surgeries.
Mm.
And
Multiple.
when surgery was not yet at that point where he had the resemblance close enough, then what was being used was latex.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if there's another image I have here.
So they must have given that
Just trying to
surge
see if I can.
they must have given that same surgery to all the doubles as well.
Yes, I mean, they would have had to have been worked on.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes. Here's another image of him. This is his profile as Stanchill. Here's his profile as McCartney. You can see the whole slope of the forehead is the same. The indentation and the nose is the same. Take a look at the jawline. That's the same. And of course, this is many years later. What's happened is, as the years have gone by, the plastic surgery is not holding up like it used to. So we're seeing him look more like himself. Here's one,
Because I've always wondered, like
John.
you see him now with like blonde hair, and it's almost as if he's given up dyeing it dark, and he's got people used to the
Yeah, he
idea of
doesn't
it being.
care
He
anymore.
doesn't care anymore. Yeah, yeah, I've noticed that.
Doesn't care anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
Even when you look at his arms are all light. So in the book, it tells us that what he did as McCartney, because people say, oh, well, he had his arms exposed or his legs
Mm,
exposed and he had black hair. And in the book, it explains that he actually dyed his body hair. I went and
mm,
actually spoke to an esthetician to to validate that can you actually dye your body hair? And she told me absolutely, yes, people dye their body hair. So that's what he did. Now here's a picture I found. On the left is who people would call Paul McCartney, and on the
Mm.
right would be the Stanchel character. Look at
Yeah.
the teeth. Look at the
Similar.
eyes. Now, what he told us was in the book, when he played Stanchel, he pushed his eyebrows down to change the look of his face, and when he played the McCartney character, he raised his eyebrows. But take a look at the chin.
Mm. But the Billy, like the original Paul McCartney did have those eyebrows that were like quite high on his head, right? So
Yeah,
was that not done with cosmetic surgery as well?
no, Paul
Must.
Paul had his eye, his right eye especially, the
Yeah.
eyebrow had a natural arc to it.
Mm.
And that's something that he got from his father. His father had a very similar eyebrow where it would arc
Mm.
up.
Yeah.
Billy tells us in the book that he had to work, focus very um, intently on
Mm.
working the eye muscles above his eye, especially his right eye, to emulate that arc or arch of Paul's. So it's not something that he was born with like Paul. Paul naturally had that. Billy actually had to work at um, building up the muscles in his eye above his eyes where his eyebrow is
Mm.
to force that eyebrow up.
Wow.
I know it sounds crazy, I'm telling you, but the only
So,
thing I can tell
mm,
folks is
so are we going to say like so how? What's your theory on how he died? Because obviously there's the car crash theory in '66, but I've also heard that he was sacrificed as well.
yeah, okay, so Paul, the prevailing conspiracy is he died in a car crash. Now, did he
Yeah.
actually die in a car crash? I don't know. He could have, and he may not have.
Mm.
Um, the ritual sacrifice piece of it comes into play as well. Was he ritually sacrificed? Now, I interviewed Sharon Clemens, who has a new book out,
Mm.
Forbidden Fruit, and she goes into great detail. She believes that Paul actually was whisked away in late August of 1966.
Mm.
And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, Sharon believes that a double was actually used on stage for the two last shows. Sharon, if I'm wrong here, please leave a comment. Um, and that he was ritually sacrificed. In the book, in memoirs, it tells us it was a ritual sacrifice, and Billy refers to it as death for success. So there's some theories that or hypothesis, I should say, and I think it's Sharon's hypothesis. Her work is very good; it's very compelling. That the car crash story was created in order to make his death more palatable, more acceptable to people he knew, family members like his father and stuff like that. Although I believe his father was probably his
Mm.
handler.
Yeah, in the club.
I believe
Yeah.
his father was a high-level Freemason that was bringing his son along. So I don't know, John. Car crash is another theory that it was a car crash,
Mm.
but that the deep state was involved, created the car crash, and they made sure after the car crash that he was dead.
Mm.
That's another scenario
Yeah. Because
that is out there.
because some of my audience members have said they remember the newspaper reports on him dying in a car crash at the time and being and the
Yes,
family members being very upset about it.
yes, yep. That was out there. There was
Yeah.
also people in the United
Mm.
States
Mm.
who claimed that it was during the Monkees episode. I think the Monkees debuted on September 12th of 1966, which would be the day after Memoirs tells us that Paul actually passed away, September 11th.
Mm.
That there was a news blurb, whether on TV or the radio, that said that Beatles singer Paul McCartney had died. And it was only said once, and then it just disappeared, and it just went into the memory hole. So there are people
Right.
that actually remember that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So the
Mm.
newspaper articles you're talking about, what was said allegedly, people have said that was said on American media. Could be. I don't know. I mean, I
Mm.
haven't read or heard either one of
No.
those things, so I can't really be
No.
definitive.
No comment. Going back to Vivian Stanshall, so I'm just looking him up here.
Yeah.
it says that he died in 1995, and there's images of him like through the years, like getting
Yeah,
old, progressively older. So, like, who is that in those photos? Like in the
that's
60s,
Victor.
70s?
So
Oh, okay.
what happened was Billy hired Victor to play the role of Stanchel, and I believe that he hired him back in the early 1970s. So
Right.
Billy was doing double duty. He was doing the Stanchel character, he was playing McCartney, he's in the studio writing the songs and all that stuff. And then he would go do his Stanchel bit for a while. And the Stanchel character a lot of times had a lot of costumes and stuff like that too. Um,
He did it at the same time, so he was actually playing Stanchel and McCartney.
at
Like
one
he,
time, yes, he was
no
paging
way.
back and forth, but
How?
most of his work was McCartney. So what happened was he hired, so in order to avoid having the Batman and Robin phenomenon where, excuse me, the Batman
Mm.
and Bruce Wayne phenomenon where they can't be in the same room at the same time
Yeah,
because they're the same person,
yeah,
he hired Victor. So let me see if I can find something on Victor here. Hold on.
yeah.
Okay, so here we have the many faces of Vivian Stanshall. So I already covered this is Billy in the top left, and then
Mm.
we start going through all of these images. So two, three, and four is Billy.
Mm.
Six appears to be Billy as well, but he has a lot of makeup on.
Oh, seven's is totally different. Eight, yeah, totally different.
Eight, nine. This is Billy. 10 is Billy. This is
Yeah.
he did this whole effeminate thing with Vivian Stanshall.
Mm.
Um, so here is this is him in the Bonzos,
Mm.
and this is Victor. This is what I refer to as Street Viv.
Mm.
He was the guy that was hired, and we can see here that they have different noses. Um, I already showed you that picture. Here we have Billy as Paul McCartney, and we have three shots or three images of him as Stanchel. Here is Billy on the left when he's with the Bonzos, and here is Victor. So we can see Victor is taller, lankier, and look at his hair. He has red hair. Billy has reddish blonde hair. So the person that died in 1995 was Victor, and he died
Right,
in a fire
right.
in his apartment or wherever he lived. And so
Mm.
that's what Wikipedia is representing. They're representing Victor.
This is
Here's
wild. This is absolutely wild.
no, it is wild. Take a look at
Yeah,
this one.
yeah. Mm.
This is Billy playing Paul
Mm.
McCartney. Here's
Oh,
Billy as Stan Shaw. And then when you superimpose both pictures, see in the McCartney picture, he's got this gigantic wig on his head.
yeah, but the
And
eyes, like, how can he just adjust the eyes for like and toggle between the two?
it's done with latex.
Latex.
La
It's latex, right? Yeah,
Latex goes back. See, latex goes back a long time.
yeah.
Latex was really put into play in Hollywood during The Wizard of Oz.
Hmm.
So that was back in the 1930s. So by the time you're getting to 1967, you're talking about 35 years or so of further development of the use of latex. So, and he tells us in the book that latex was used in order to create the imagery, in order to create the look. Here, here he is, older, maybe he's about 50, 60 here, and go all the way across. This is all latex, folks. This is all, this is theater stuff. Latex,
So when,
facial hair, beards.
so when you're seeing Billy through the years, like up until the present day, is that latex or is that now how he now looks after surgery? And he's just that's
No, the way he in the later years, the way he looks is the way he looks.
yeah,
So,
yeah, okay, yeah,
okay, so when we see this, that's how he looks today, right? Which is really this guy right here on the left,
yeah.
who
After all the
has
surgery,
aged,
yeah,
who
yeah.
has aged.
But here's an example. Like, so he's got the droopy eyes there. So are you saying that that is latex eyes there or not?
No, this is through a blepharoplasty.
Yeah, okay. So then how does he toggle between like and suddenly become the guy on the right with normal eyes?
Well, the guy on the right, if you take a look at his eye, right?
Yeah.
In fact, he's got a line right here, which is very peculiar. You see that?
Yeah, but like the two eyes on the left is like the typical mirror replica of Paul McCartney's eyes, you know, and then but suddenly he's saying that he switches character, and then how does he get his eyes non like Billy like
Yeah,
Paul's?
you would have to look at actual image of Paul right here,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's got exact.
right?
So he's done his eyes exactly like the original Paul.
They're similar. They're
Yeah,
not exactly right. So you got kind of that lazy, droopy thing going
yeah.
here,
But then
right?
and he had that done in number three. You can see those eyes have been done to make them look like
Yeah,
number one.
right. But they also could do it through latex. See, the thing is, like when you watch
Right.
movies, take a look at you'll see actors and actresses um, when latex is used, they could do a lot of amazing things with latex.
Okay.
Okay. I know it's difficult. It really is. It's hard to get your head around. The only thing I could recommend is, like I said, I retired the research, the ongoing research, day in and day out stuff. I'm done with that. But
Mm,
my YouTube channel is still up. It's going to stay up as a repository. Take a look at what I've done there because I explain a lot of this stuff.
mm.
Um, Here's another image. This is the ocular prosthetic. It was Sally said that what happens with ocular prosthetics because they lay on top of the eyeball,
Yeah.
that the top lid protrudes out, and we see this with Billy. It protrudes
Mm.
out. Here he is. This is a really weird one with the bear. We can see that the bear.
Symbolic.
This is Pudsey, the bear,
Yeah, yeah.
has he's got his right eye masked over.
Mm.
That's because Billy can't see. He's blind in his right eye.
But that Pudsy's always had that over the eye.
Right, but look what he's done with. Yeah, I'll take you through the chart.
Yeah,
He's the official logo of Children in Need.
yeah.
Right, Children in Need is the BBC's UK charity. Since 1980, it has raised over 1.5 billion pounds for disadvantaged children and young people in the UK.
Mm,
But aside from Billy promoting Children in Need, is he giving us a hidden clue about himself?
mm,
In the book, he tells us that he was um, in a program and ritually abused starting at the age of 3. That was his earliest memory. And that he was tutored by Aleister Crowley for 10 years. Billy was born in 37, Crowley died in 47, so that's the 10 years. So what is he telling us? So I'll go through the numerology real quick. When Billy is playing Paul McCartney, he's represented by the number 9. When he's playing himself,
mm,
when he's not Billy, he's the number 6. All right. So Pudsey has Pythagorean numerology of 9. So right there, he's aligning himself with the bear for some reason. Why is that? Pudsey has a patch over his right eye. Billy is blind in his right eye. Pudsey is wearing a Sergeant Pepper costume.
mm.
Is Pudsey, as depicted in the image, a representation of Billy? Is Billy telling us that he was also a child in need as a result of childhood trauma-based programs? Again, this is per memoirs, that possibly resulted in the loss of his right eye due to ritual abuse.
Just to play devil's advocate, though, I mean, Pudsey would have had photos with every single celebrity out there because they all come on and do the Children in Need show.
Yeah,
It's like annual thing in England, and so every single celebrity would have had a photo with Pudsey, but would it not be the case that it looks as though it's all very symbolic and aligned with Billy and that, but it could just be that, he was just one of thousands of celebrities just have a photo with him.
yeah, but you have to understand what we have to do is we have to understand Billy's background. See,
Yeah.
so we could say, yeah, of course, all these different folks have
Mm.
posed with, Pudsey the bear and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But we have to understand Billy's background. So
Hmm.
in memoirs, when Billy talks about ritual abuse, when he talks about being in a program, when he talks about being tutored and mentored by Aleister Crowley, I also have footage where he's in an interview where he said that he was taught to write backwards, write his name backwards. This is Crowley's law of reversal. And then when we see uh, Pudsey's eye
Hmm.
uh, hidden here, the hidden eye, the blind eye, like Billy has a blind eye, in the Sergeant Pepper costume, and the red
Mm.
feet,
Oh, the red shoes,
the red shoes.
Red Shoe Club.
Yes.
Yeah. Also,
Okay. So,
the one eye
yeah.
is also the one eye as well. In their
Yes.
Freemasonry as well.
Yes.
The
That's the
all-seeing eye.
thing, John. Like I said, it's
Mm.
a lot of it, when I talk about the Beatles being into the occult,
Yeah.
very esoteric. Billy's heavily into the occult, into mysticism. This is the piece of it that a lot of people, because they don't know about it, when I talk about this, it's like, I don't know about this. I don't know.
Mm.
The only way you're going to know is you have to understand what Billy is about and what the Beatles were all about. And once you start digging into it and you start understanding their connections back into the occult, back into mythology and mysticism, like the cult of Pan. Billy aligns himself with the cult of Pan. I don't think I have a picture of that. Maybe I
Mm.
do. Let me see. Hold on one second.
Whilst you're
I have a
finding
lot
that,
of occult pictures.
whilst you're finding that, I
Yeah,
forgot to mention, I used to work in a music studio in 2004, 2005. And on one occasion, there was like a memo that got sent around, and it was that Paul McCartney was going to be coming to the building, right? And it said in that memo, it says, if anyone sees him, you have to make sure you call him by his real name. And I remember we all at work, we were all thinking, like, why are you even saying that? You know, like,
right.
why would you even sending a memo to say that, oh, this person Paul has to be called Paul? Like, it just even that at the time just felt very strange. And I think so one of our someone that worked with us when they saw him, they went, "All right, John." Just
Yeah,
because we just thought it was so arrogant that Paul McCartney's asked everyone to make sure that they refer to him as Paul, like, well, Sir Paul,
yeah. Don't
whatever.
call
But
him Billy.
yeah, don't
Don't
call
call
it.
him what?
But
Don't
why
call him
ask?
William.
Yeah, like, but why ask us who have we wouldn't have known that anyway. But it was just it almost felt slightly arrogant, entitled. I don't know. It's just strange.
I think that they probably are concerned that there are people that, even if they're not like in the inner circle,
Yeah.
know that maybe his name is Billy or his name is William, and somebody
Right.
might, joke around or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but if we take a look here, see, here
Hmm.
we have a depiction of Pan,
Yeah.
and look at Billy, right? Jumping over a car in the same way that Pan is jumping over this log. And
Mm.
I can't go into this chart now because it'll take us a long time. It's a very interesting chart, but the whole Sergeant Pepper outfits, the multicolored outfits or pied clothing is tied to the Pied Piper. The story of the
Right.
Pied Piper is a variation of the story of the mythology of Pan. Um, if we go to the Help album, we're told, to the profane, they're spelling out a semaphore
Hmm.
for the word help. It's not that at all. If we use semaphore, um, which is visual signaling by the means of flags or lights
Mm.
or their hands, it's NUJV. It's not HELP. No, what they're showing you on the cover of Help is Crowley's ritual symbols through, positions. And this comes right from the Thelema website. Osiris slain, Typhon, Isis mourning, Set fighting. And I did a whole bit on this. I explained the whole Help album. But here, what's
Mm.
going on here? Did the Beatles know they were doing this? No, the Beatles didn't know. They were told to pose.
Yeah.
But the machine behind them. Here's another thing here.
But just pause for a sec. So let's say they did that NUJV, okay, and let's just say that is referencing. So it's like Osiris and Set and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff, right? Are they doing that as a tip in the hat, as an acknowledgement of these forces, or is it
yes,
is it something they're doing to create a kind of a functional sigil, where like a gateway that draws in energy
yeah,
and influences reality in a very specific pre-programmed way, or
both.
is it just a tip of the hat to all that?
I think it's both.
Right. Okay.
I think it's both. It's like I said, it's very complex.
Yeah.
And it's both. And in fact, I went through this and I actually said I can't go into it here. It would be way too
Yeah. Yeah.
long.
It's a deep
But
one.
they're actually telling the story of the rise of Horus.
Mm.
That's what they're telling us here. Osiris is slain.
Yeah.
Typhon was also identified with Set in the Egyptian. Set is the Egyptian god of destruction.
Yeah.
Isis goes into mourning. Isis then uh, finds because what happened was Set chopped up, dismembered Osiris.
Mm.
Osiris was Set's brother. Isis puts him back together again, except for one part, his plumbing. And then Horus is born. And
Mm.
then Horus goes on to battle Set. It's the classic battle between the light and the dark. So the way I decoded this, and others might decode it a different way, is the Help album is also telling us the story of Horus, the Savior God, that's going to take us into the eon of Horus. Here's another one here. This is crazy. One
Mm.
of my listeners pointed this out. So a lot of people look at the parlophone label and they think that that's the British pound sign,
Mm.
but it's not. It's the Leviathan cross. So even the label
Yeah.
is depicting, and it's within a circle, which makes it a sigil.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, and the original parlophone label was referred to as the black and gold, which is the color of alchemy. Now, some people still want to argue with me that, oh, this is the British pound sign. I keep saying, why would the British pound sign be the trademark symbol for parlophone?
It also looks a bit like it's made out of rope. You know, when you have like the knot in the hangman
Yeah,
noose. You know.
but it's almost like a snake, John.
Yeah.
It's snaking,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this goes back to the Bible and the snake and Lucifer slash Satan.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's the whole thing with the butcher cover. And then we have this whole crazy bit here with the peace signs. The peace sign
Yeah.
is symbolism for the Hebrew word vav, which is the sixth letter in their alphabet.
Mm.
So when you get the double peace sign like Ringo always does, what you're actually getting is the satanic sigil.
Mm.
And then we see George here holding the nails in the shape of two V. So vav, with a sixth letter in the Hebrew alphabet, is also referred to as a nail. So in modern Hebrew, the word vav
Mm.
is used to mean hook or a nail. Vav in gematria represents the number six. Nail symbolism can mean securing, protecting, fastening, as well as suffering and sacrifice. The nail is often associated in Christian tradition with the crucifixion of Christ. So again, I can't go into this, but take a
Yeah.
look at what's going on here. See, we have a V
Mm.
and a V, and John is holding all of these nails. So
Mm.
what's being communicated to us? It's this it's the sigil of Satan or the sigil
Mm.
of Lucifer. And by the way, for those who are listening, I know there's a difference between Satan and Lucifer. But the reason why I combine them is because a lot of people don't
Mm.
differentiate. So to many people, it's one and the same. But again, too much to get into
Yeah,
for what the time
just
we have
quickly,
left.
I'm not going to slow it down. I just want to say that you see loads of celebrities, musicians, artists doing certain things, you know, like that, or you know, the covering one eye and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
people say that is definitely them in the club. But isn't it not the case that they could go into a photo shoot and it could be the producer, the photographer, the people behind going, right, I want you to cover one eye now. You know, it might not be them through their own volition choosing those signs to say that they're yet on part of the club. It could just be they're in a room. Hey, can you now just put a hand over one eye? Or can you now do that? You know, but everyone thinks, you
Yes.
know, I don't know what you think about that, but that just
Yeah.
seems
No,
a
it's
little.
exactly what I said here with help. I said
Yeah, yeah,
they didn't
exactly,
know this. They
exactly.
didn't know they were doing
Yeah,
ritual,
yeah,
thelemic ritual
yeah,
symbols. They didn't know that. They just were told to hold your hands out this way, and then the
yeah,
pictures were taken.
yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
it's the same thing with the butcher cover, which is a creepy cover,
Disgusting.
right? So dismembered body parts can represent mind control and or being transformed into a different kind of being,
Mm,
at least partially, to an other than human person or spirit. Now, one person, a listener on my channel, Into the Occult, said to me the Masonic connection and ritual connecting to the impending death of Paul are transparent. He's talking about the butcher cover. He goes, obviously, the record cover shows a severed baby's head in Paul's lap. Paul was allegedly decapitated.
mm,
And there's a reference to time and death. Paul's wearing a wristwatch and he's showing it to us.
hmm.
And then my source goes on to say he probably wasn't aware of this, but no wonder he was having bad dreams. In memoirs, it tells us he was having nightmares, and they draw it back to the Faustian bargain that he engaged in. And as he was getting closer to his end of life,
Mm.
the nightmares picked up more and more. Now, also, there's a people will say that the Beatles, they didn't want to do this cover. They didn't want to do the
Mm.
Butcher cover, and that's not true. I have an actual interview from John Lennon going back into the
Mm.
1970s where he said, especially him, but the others were on board too, but John in particular wanted to do the cover because he said he was sick and tired of doing these straightforward, boring album covers, and he thought that, this here was because of the shock value,
Mhm.
he liked it. So the the explanation out there that they really didn't want to do this because people don't want to accept that the Beatles would participate in something like this, whether they knew it or not, is not true. They were aware of it, they were on board, and they were okay with doing the album cover.
Yeah. And also, just a quick one, like when the real Paul McCartney died, sh surely wasn't there not camaraderie from the rest of them to say, look, we don't want to do it anymore. We don't want this imposter. Or are they just so far down? Are they so into it now that there's no backing out?
I don't think there's any backing out, John. I think that obviously were they had
Pissed.
to
Mm.
be
Mm.
very, very upset
Yeah.
and about Paul not being there anymore. But I think that the premise that they would just walk away, no. The Beatles were too big an operation for
Mm.
anybody to walk away from it. And
Hmm.
what I also tell people is that um, the death of Paul McCartney, the replacement of Paul McCartney, is a subplot.
Hmm.
The biggest story about the Beatles is what they were put into play to do to change culture and society. And whether Paul was replaced or not, people have to transcend. They have to get
Mm.
past that whole like
Yeah. Yeah.
Paul dying. You have to get past that
Yeah.
because whether Paul died or not, the Beatles were in play to social engineer
Mm.
with or without Paul.
Yeah.
So if Paul was still there, Paul was still in the Beatles would still have continued on that trajectory to do what they were missioned to do, what they were constructed and manufactured to do. So we have to get, I'm talking to the audience here because a lot of times people get caught up in the weeds on this thing, and you have to get above the weeds. You got to look at
Mm.
the bigger picture on this thing.
But from their perspective, John Lennon, Harrison, were they not like, oh no, fuck this, like without Paul, like we die together. Well, I'm not doing it anymore. Like from their own perspective.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, there was it wasn't harmony when Billy came on board.
Yeah.
There was, I mean, in the book he explains this too, that
Yeah.
he said John in particular can be very, very harsh with him.
Mm.
And we could start to see that starting with really with the White Album, because Sergeant Pepper itself, that album, was really
Mm.
the Billy and George Martin project. That's what I concluded. Um, the Beatles, the rest of the Beatles were there, uh, but their level of participation was not anywhere close to what we had with Billy doing what he was doing. Billy was
Mm.
he was deleting tracks that others recorded on. He re-recorded his own guitar parts, bass parts, and stuff like that. So it was really him and George Martin putting that whole record together because that Sergeant Pepper was very, very important to the psychedelic movement,
Mm. Hmm.
that whole psychedelic genre of music in that whole era. Very, very important. So it had to be done right. But once we get to the White Album, there's a lot of um, dissension among the band. And the Beatles themselves talked about this. John had talked
Mm.
about it. George Harrison had talked about it. Ringo Starr walked out of the White Album sessions because he uh, he thought that I didn't love him anymore. Um, George Martin actually walked out of the sessions. He just said, "I'm out of here," because of the way the sessions were being run. Because Billy at that point had taken the reins as the de facto handler, manager of the band. So there was a lot of dissension. And we actually see that as we get into the Let It Be album as well, into I should say, the Get Back sessions. The Peter Jackson depiction of what went on was, that was not reality. We have to go back to the original um, uh, the original film to really get a feel for what that was all about. And it was not, George Harrison walked out of the Get Back sessions. He left. And and we can also see, even in the Get Back, Peter Jackson's Get Back documentary, I'll give Peter the credit. He did leave in scenes where we could see where it was coming apart. There was one scene I remember where they were in the studio and Billy was talking about it. He's Paul McCartney, again, for those who are not familiar with Billy. Billy was talking about next steps for the band and keeping the band together
Mm.
and going out and playing live and doing this stuff. And the other band members were quiet. They didn't say anything. They didn't say, "Yeah, that's a great idea, Paul. Let's, that's what we want to do." No, to the contrary, they wanted no part of that. They wanted out. And in fact, Billy said that it had gotten to the point in the band where it was so there was so much head knocking
Yeah.
that it was him who decided to break the band up.
Mm.
It wasn't Yoko Ono and John Lennon. It wasn't because Yoko was a pain in the ass. I mean, she was a pain in the ass, but that was not the reason why the Beatles broke up. Billy decided to pull the plug on the band because it just wasn't working anymore.
Does he have the power to
Wasn't
do
working.
that though? Does he have the power to do that? Because I would have thought if this is an engineered band, then it's the people in the shadows that are deciding when the band ends or not.
I think, well, there's a couple of things, right? So if we go back to the occult aspects of this, the
Hmm.
Beatles worked really together for 7 years. The number seven is all around the Beatles.
Hmm.
So I believe that because they had reached a point where it reached the number seven, 7 years, that there was a plan to to dismantle the band at
Yeah.
that point in time, to end it. But I believe that Billy played an integral part in deciding when that moment
Hmm.
within that seventh year was going to take place.
Right.
Um, he comes from based upon research done by another researcher that I'm connected into, Stacy, who did a presentation on my show. But just to give you an example here it is right here. She dug in, and there's a lot of clues in Memoirs. Memoirs is a book, it's like a big puzzle, folks.
Hmm.
Lots of clues, embedded clues. It's all encoded. It's a Masonic book. And if you dig and dig and dig, you're going to get some answers. She concluded, and I think her case is, I believe her case to be very compelling. She did some excellent work. That Billy is actually, his father was Douglas Hamilton. His mother was Elizabeth Ivy Percy. And these are two blue blood Scottish bloodlines. And she believes, she took a shot at it, that his name could possibly be William Alfred Douglas Hamilton. And this is going to be very strange to a lot of people. And I think his father died, if Douglas Hamilton was his father, if. I think he passed away in the 1970s. I'm not sure about his mother. But if we go down even further, we could see that on his mother's side of the house, um, they had Campbell bloodline. So you'll hear a lot of times people will say his name is Billy Campbell or William
Yeah, I've
Campbell.
heard of that. Yeah, so that is that
Yep.
that's why it's come in. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so Billy he tells us in memoirs that he has Campbell relatives. He even says, "Yep, I know people will say my name is William Campbell, but he's telling us it's not the case, but he has Campbell blood. And that Campbell blood comes from his mother's side of the house."
Right.
So the reason why I'm showing this chart, the cast of characters, is because he comes from a very powerful family. And obviously, the way he has been bred, uh, he was brought along, groomed and handled to achieve a very influential position in the world. In this case, it happens to be with one of the most famous, most influential bands in the world, the Beatles.
Mm.
So I believe that he had a lot of say, maybe not the final say, but he had a lot of say in how things would transpire. So we talked about the ending, how the Beatles ended, I think that he was an integral part in at least having input and having feedback and insights as to when that time should be. That's my take on it. And again, I'm speculating here, but were there powers above him that were uh, more uh, influential in steering the ship? Yes,
Mm,
yes. The buck didn't stop with him, but the thing is, John, as he went along the timeline, his status within the pyramid grew more and more prominent. And in fact, I think today he's in the illuminated degrees. He's part of the Illuminati,
mm,
and that's where he resides today. So I hope that answered your question.
mm, hmm.
But the book tells us he pulled the plug on the Beatles.
Right.
And he also did say that Yoko was a pain in his ass. But
Yeah. If she, yeah. Um, if she was the real one as well, we don't know whether she
yeah.
is. You just don't know, do you? Um, yeah. Hmm.
So we never got to Rubber Soul, but
Yeah, that's all right.
that's okay. You know,
That's fine.
um, anybody who wants to know about Rubber Soul, I'll send John some links and you can
Yeah,
take a
great.
look at it.
Um, yeah, no, great stuff, mate. Great stuff. And it's just we're only really scratching the surface of it. I mean, there's
Oh, man.
so much more, and so much more detail that you go into in your presentations and everything else. So
There's 8 years of it, John. There's
yeah,
eight
yeah,
years of
yeah,
it, and it was
yeah.
it was you know a lot of deep research, and it wasn't just me. I mean, I was connected into a group of maybe a half dozen researchers. It was a
Mm,
loosely knit group, networked together. Very, very, very smart, very good researchers, and a lot of it is my research. But
hmm
like I said, the eye was Sally. That's not mine. She made that discovery, the most important discovery to differentiate Paul and Billy. Stacy's work on his family tree is like I said, we can't be 100% sure, but is it compelling? It sure is.
hmm
Sharon Clemens, who was not part of the network at the time, but Sharon and I communicate, here and there now since she's been on the show. Really, really good work in her book, A Forbidden Fruit. I recommend everybody read that because that's going to be a version of the story that is not in memoirs, and it's again very compelling and very good. So there's a lot more to this than
Yeah,
what people think. It's not just about the replacement of Paul McCartney. Like I said,
yeah,
subplot,
yeah.
so much more to it.
Thank you to my incredible guest here, Mike Williams. That those we only want to do like an hour and a half. We've done 3 hours. I just time's flown with that, and we probably could have done another 7 hours as well. Still not even got close to
Just tip of the iceberg.
everything. Absolute tip of the iceberg. But this is what it's about. I'm trying to bring on incredible researchers and thought leaders like Mike onto the show, and yeah, give it up for him, and big up to Mike. And Mike, just plug all your stuff that you want to plug, just so I can get it in there.
Just go to my website, folks. I have a hub website, sageofquay, sageofquay.com, and all of my links are there. Like I said, I wrapped up the research on the Beatles, the ongoing day-to-day stuff, but my Paul is Dead channel is up for as a repository, and also I'm a musician. My music links are all there as well, and yeah, poke around, see if there's anything there that interests you.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that incredible presentation by Mike Williams there. If you'd like to watch the unedited director's cut, which is a bonus 1 hour of footage, please consider joining my Patreon. I've also now made this available for YouTube members as well for the same cost. So if you'd like to join, please do so. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed that video, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.